Hi there and welcome back to my channel, Kelly Rene Every Day, where I'm here dedicated to teaching you the fundamentals of crochet through beginner-friendly projects. Now, today what I have for you is a granny ripple blanket, and this granny ripple blanket is an easy pattern to follow for the absolute beginner. We only need to use 3 fundamental stitches, which are the chain stitch, the slip stitch, and then the double crochet. And I'm going to show you how we're going to create these chevron patterns with each one of the colors here. Now this blanket, like I said, is beginner friendly because we're only utilizing those 3 stitches, but once we get into it, you're going to notice it's a 1-row repeat. So you only have to know how to do the pattern, and then it's going to be a completely reversible afghan. So let's get into things. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the specifics of this blanket. Now, I created this in a lapghan size. Now, a lapghan is going to be a size of a blanket that is perfect for simply being on your lap as you're sitting down. It is not too bulky or wide or long that it's going to, be hard to handle. So it's nice and small. The physical sizes of this lapghan are 36 inches long by 36 inches wide. Now, if you wanted to make this longer or bigger, you just continue to add more rows. Very simple to customize to whatever size you want. And I'll talk about that as we get into things. But I wanted to show you the supplies that you'll need to make this afghan. So first and foremost, you need some yarn, okay? The yarn that I chose is Premier brand. This is anti-pilling and it's bamboo chunky. So the size is a bulky weight number 5. So you could substitute any bulky weight number 5 for this project that you have in any colors, okay? The needle that I'm using is a 6.5 millimeter crochet hook. Oopsie, I'm sorry, 6.5 millimeter crochet hook, which it suggests here. Now, sometimes I'll go up on a size of a hook on an afghan, so I want it to be a little bit more drapey and loose, but this yarn is very soft and it's not stiff at all. So I know you don't get to feel and touch it like I do, but based on the yarn, this worked out really well. So I did use a 6.5 millimeter hook. You'll notice that this is machine washable, but it does say lay flat to dry. And the colors that I'm using here for this afghan, I used 3 different colors. This is Mochi, I think it's called, M-O-C-H-I, but it's like an ivory off-white color. Now, the specifics as far as how much yarn, I have 131 yards on this one skein, or 120 meters. It's a 3.5 ounce skein. And then it is made up of 80% acrylic and 20% rayon with bamboo. But I just want to say you can use any type of yarn that you'd like to use, and if you want the same dimensions and size that I have here, then a bulky 5 weight is going to work well. Now, the other two colors are of the same brand. I've got the blue raspberry here, and then I've got the terracotta. Okay, now my pattern down below, there's a link to it in the description. It will have all of the quantities that you are going to need. But again, I'll talk about those more specifically as we start getting into things. Now, additionally, you're going to need a scissors, your crochet hook, and as I said earlier, I'm using a 6.5 millimeter. I have a Susan Bates. I really like those hooks. So if, it really can be any 6.5 millimeter that you choose. And then I have a yarn needle to weave in the ends at the end. A couple of things before we get into the actual tutorial. Number 1, quantity of the yarn. Now, for the size of the blanket that I have here, which is 36 by 36, making a nice lapghan size, I used 2 skeins of the off-white, 2 skeins of my blue raspberry, and 3 skeins of the terracotta. Now, the reason that it worked out that way is because as we look at the length here, each one of these chunks, if you would, is 6 rows. So 6 rows at that 36 inches wide, that was about 1 skein of yarn with, I'm going to kind of hold this up, about this much left over. It wasn't enough to go back another pass, so I left it at 6. So this was 1 skein. This was 2 skeins of the terracotta, and then I was 3 skeins of the terracotta. And then this is the end of my blanket. Now, for the blue raspberry, then since I have 2 stripes in here, that's 1, 2 skeins. And then for the off-white. The off-white, I ended up having 3 rows here, 4, 5, 6, so that was 1 skein. And then I had 1 here, and then 3 with the chains and such on the other end. So it was 2 skeins of the off-white color with a little bit more left over than the others. So, so that is the quantities that we have here. Now, as I said earlier, this is a 1-row repeat. So it's the very same on the back as it is on the front. So it's a reversible afghan. Now, I will have the pattern down below in the comments. If you have any questions as you work, don't hesitate to ask. I always read the comments and I make sure that I get those answered for you. Additionally, you're going to want to subscribe. If you enjoy what you see here, I really appreciate a like, a share, a comment, but then also subscribe to my channel and hit the notifications buttons, because then you're always going to get updated when I upload new videos. And I'd really appreciate that and have you being part of my community here. Okay, so I think we're ready to get started with our tutorial. Okay, we are ready to get started with things. Now, as we establish our chains, we are going to have to chain multiples of 18 and then add 1 at the end. So to obtain the 36-inch long afghan or lapghan that I have, you're going to want to chain 127. But for this video and this tutorial, I'm going to make it a little bit shorter, and I am going to do 55 chains. That's going to be a multiple of 3 times 18 plus 1, so that's 55. So again, multiples of 18 plus 1, so for the 36 to make it the actual size that I have for my lapghan here, that you're going to want to chain 127, or add to that or subtract from that multiples of 18, and then add in exactly 1 extra stitch. So to do that, I'm going to start my chain stitches by putting a slip knot in place and getting my yarn on the hook. Now, if you are an absolute beginner and you need some basics in crochet getting started, I do have a video on my channel about getting or learning how to crochet in 2 hours. This is going to do exactly what I did here. Get the slip stitch on, or the slip knot on, how to hold your yarn, how to hold your needle, and getting started with the chain stitch and a single and double crochet stitches. So I will link those videos down below if you need those. But if you're ready to get started and you're familiar with this, then we're ready to go. So once I have my yarn on my hook, I'm going to be ready to start my chains. Now to chain, I'm simply going to yarn over and I'm going to pull through up my loop. Now I'm going to tell you, keep these chains looser. Make sure you come up to the largest part of your barrel, make a little bit of some room there, a little bit larger, and then pull through. It's going to be much easier as we create our first row back down that chain to get your crochet hook in. So go ahead and chain 55 stitches, and I'll meet you back up when you have the amount of chains that you want for your project. Okay, now I have all of my chains created. So again, if you are planning to do the 36-inch wide lapghan, you want to chain 127. But for our purposes here, I chained 55 for just a smaller version so that we can get the idea of the stitch. So the first step that we're going to do once we have our chains in place is we are going to do a slip stitch in each one of the chains going back. Now, the slip stitch is very easy, but what it does for us is it creates a nice kind of finished off border, if you would, for the end of our afghan. If we didn't have our slip stitch on the end here, what would happen is this would be a very kind of loose looking end. So this makes it finish off a lot nicer. So our first row is going to be establishing our slip stitch. Now to do that, we are simply going to, starting with the second stitch from our hook, or the second chain from our hook, I should say, we are going to slip stitch back. Now, slip stitches are short, small little stitches, and they can get tight and hard to work back in. So I'm going to encourage you here again, just like we did on our chain, is to be loose with your tension. So to create a slip stitch, I'm going to go into the second stitch. So the second stitch is going to be not where my loop is coming out of, but the very next one. And I'm going to have a little bit of room here. Notice that there's room in my, in my loop for my hook. And I'm going to go in, I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to pull through the chain, and then continue and pull through my loop. Okay? And that's my first slip stitch. So now I've got that loop on my hook yet. I'm going to make sure that it's nice and loose, that it's not super tight, and I'm going to go directly into the next chain, yarn over, pull through, and continue to pull through a slip stitch. Okay? Again, nice and loose on my chain. Notice there's a little bit of room there. Go into the next chain, yarn over, pull through, and pull through, keeping it nice and loose and as even tension as possible, so that these end up about the same size. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it sets up a nice first row for us. Go through and in, pull through and pull through, keeping everything nice and loose. Go in, pull up a loop, pull through, and pull through. And you're going to do this on all of the chains going all the way back to the beginning. And so at that point, we will be ready to start our following row. I will be back. Okay, now I have finished all the slip stitches back on my foundational chain. So as I said earlier, there are only 3 stitches that we're going to be using throughout this project. The chain stitch, the slip stitch, so we've done those 2, and now the last one we're going to use that we're going to continue for the entire rest of the project is just going to be a double crochet. So to do a double crochet, what we're going to do is we are actually going to turn our work, and we are going to double crochet into the 5th stitch from our hook. So our hook here is coming out of the stitch right here, that is our V, and we are going to count that one as our first one. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th is going to be right there. Okay, right here is our 5th stitch. So let me get my little bit better pointer here. I don't know where my needle went. Here we go. Found it. So so if I look here, I'm going to grab my needle out of here. My loop is coming through here. So the stitch that it's coming out of is the 1st stitch, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So I'm going to be going underneath these 2 right here, the 5th stitch from my hook. Okay, 5th stitch from my hook. So let me get my hook back in. All right, so there's no chaining here. We're just going to do 3 double crochets into that 5th stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me find it again. Now a double crochet, get that out of the way there. A double crochet is going to be first starting with a yarn over. I keep losing it. And then I'm going to go into my stitch under both V's. Okay, so you got to get underneath both V's here, and that's where being loose on that slip stitch on the previous row is going to be really important. Go underneath. I'm going to pull up a loop. I've got 3 loops on my hook, right? I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to pull through 2. I'm going to yarn over again and pull through the last 2. First double crochet in that stitch. Now I'm going to do 2 more. Yarn over, go back in, yarn over, pull up a loop, 3 on, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. 2 double crochets. 3rd one, yarn over, go into that same stitch, pull through, 3 on, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through the last 2. And now this is my first granny cluster, which is 3 double crochets into the same stitch. Okay, so now we're going to continue on. So our pattern says that we need to skip the next 2 stitches. So the next 2 stitches, if I turn here, are going to be 1 and 2. So we're going to skip those 2, and we're going to do another 3 double crochets into the 3rd stitch from where we were at. So I'm simply going to yarn over. I'm going to go into that 3rd stitch underneath both loops. So I got 1 and 2. okay? And now I'm going to do my first double crochet. So yarn over, pull up that loop, get 3 on, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2 again. First double crochet in that stitch. Yarn over, go back in, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. That's 2 double crochets into that same stitch. And then we need to do one more. Yarn over, go in, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And now I've got 3 double crochets into that same stitch. So I've got 1 granny cluster, 3 double crochets in the same stitch, and 2 granny clusters, 3 double crochets into that same stitch. Okay, so now we're going to create our first peak. What we're going to do is we're going to skip 2 stitches again. So I'm going to get this out of the way here. We're going to skip 1, 2, and in the 3rd stitch from where we're at, we're going to do 3 double crochets. We're going to chain 3, and then we're going to go 3 double crochets back into that same stitch. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to put my hook back in. I'm going to skip my next 2 here, and then I'm going to yarn over, and in that 3rd stitch, I'm going to go underneath both loops, 1, and get underneath the 2nd one. Again, those that slip stitch is a little bit tighter, so might have to maneuver a little bit. And now I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2 for the first double crochet. Do 2 more. So yarn over, go back right back in the same one, pull through 2, pull through 2, and then do that 3rd one. Right in, pull through 2, pull through 2. Okay, so that's my first granny cluster. Now I'm going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay? And now I'm going to double crochet right back into that very same stitch. So there's going to be actually 6 double crochets in that same stitch. So my next one is going to be my first. And then I'm going to do a 2nd back in. And I'm going to do a 3rd double crochet right back in. Okay, so let's see what we have. Oops, let me pull up that loop. Nuggets, let me redo that one. 3rd double crochet the 2nd time, back in. Okay, so I'm going to take my hook out and let's see what we've got. Let's lay this down. So here was where we started, granny cluster, and now I've got a granny cluster, chain 3, push this up, and I've got a granny cluster here. So in this one right here, we did 6 double crochets total. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back down. We're going to skip 2, and in that 3rd stitch, we're going to do another 3 double crochets. So let's do that. So I'm going to skip 2, yarn over. So here's my, let me go this way. We got to tip it back a little bit and see that's the one that we went into, right? So then next to it is the first one, 2nd one, and then the 3rd one right here is going to be what I'm going to go into. So I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to go in underneath both V's, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. There you go, first double crochet. And then we're going to do 2 more. Yarn over, go in, pull up that loop. We've got 3 on. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, go right back in. 3 on. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. And there's our next granny cluster. And now we're going to do 1 more. So we're going to skip 2 stitches again, 1, 2, and in the 3rd one, we are going to put our next granny cluster, 3 double crochets. So go underneath both loops. There we go. Yarn over, pull up, get 3 on that hook. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. And 2 more. 2 and 3. Okay, so right now we're on from our peak. We've got 1, 2, 3 granny clusters. We're now going to create our valley. Now to create our valley, we're going to skip 5 stitches. So let's just grab our hook out for a second and look at our stitches. So here is the stitch that we went into for our double crochets, our granny cluster, our last granny cluster. So we need to skip 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to skip 5, and in the 6th chain from where we're at, we are going to put another granny cluster. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to leave my pin in there, okay, or my needle. And again, we're going to skip 5, and we're going to do our next granny cluster into that 6th from the hook. So I think I've got it figured out here. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to go straight in underneath both, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and now here we want to kind of pull this together a little bit with your 2 thumbs. Otherwise it's so far apart. You're going to yarn over and you're going to pull through 2. And that's going to then create our first double crochet. Then we need to do 2 more into that very same space. Okay, and a third. Okay, so now let me take my hook out and lay this down, and let's see what's going on. So now you'll notice, I'm going to kind of push this up a little bit. This is where we started. Here's our peak. Now we came down and we just created our valley with that skipping 5, and now we're going to find out that this is going to start going up. Okay, so we're going to continue. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to skip 2, and we're going to put 3 double crochets into that 3rd stitch from where we're at. So continue doing exactly what we did. So now I'm going to do 1, 2, skip 2, go into the 3rd. So yarn over, go in under both, I'm going to tip it a little bit, underneath both, and then I'm going to yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and that's my first double crochet. Yarn over, go right back in with the next 2 double crochets. Those are always the easier ones. The first one's getting them in, again, because it's that slip stitch, it's that really short, tends to be a little bit tighter stitch. It's a little harder to get back into. All right, so let's see where we're at again. Okay, so we've got 2 going up. So now what we're going to do is we are going to skip 2, okay, because we're going to mirror what we have on this side. So notice that we've got these two, and now we're going to do our peak over here. So we're going to skip 2, put 3 double crochets in, yarn over, skip 2, 1, 2. So now we're going to go underneath both, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Then we're going to yarn over, do 2 more double crochets right back in there. Right back in there. Crochet. Get our 3 double crochets, our granny cluster, and now we're at the peak. So we're going to do chain 1, 2, and 3. Chain 3. And then right back in that very same stitch, 3 more double crochets. 1, for a total of 6 into that 1 stitch, 2, and 3. And there's our next peak. So let's see what we got. Look at that. Peak, valley, and peak. Okay, so this is where we're at. We're now ready to start and get into our next valley. So we're going to do another granny cluster. We're going to skip 5 and then another granny cluster on this side to pull these 2 together. So I'm going to put my hook back in, I'm going to yarn over, and we're going to go right into that third stitch, skip 2, and then we're going to yarn over, pull up, pull through 2, pull through 2 for the first double crochet. 2 more right into that very same stitch. 2 more. Okay. Skip 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in the 6th one, from where we're at, we're going to double crochet right into there. So I'm going to go into underneath both V's. Okay. Yarn over, pull up a loop. We've got 3 on. Yarn over, pull through 2. And now these are going to want to kind of pull apart. So I always kind of scooch them together, hold this front and back, and then I pull through both of those loops to just kind of keep them a little closer for a nicer look. And now I'm going to do 2 more double crochets right back into that very same stitch. There we go. So if I take my hook out, what we've done is now we've created our next valley. So where we started was we went up, we created the peak first. We came down, created the valley with the skip 5. Then we went up, we did a chain 3 to create the peak. And then we went down, created our valley, and now we're going to go back up. So we're going to do another granny cluster in the 3rd stitch from our hook. So we're going to yarn over, skip 2, and in that 3rd from our hook, and then make sure you go underneath both loops. So again, sometimes those are a little tighter, just the nature of that slip stitch. Get underneath both. And now we're going to pull up our loop, pull through 2, pull through 2, and then do 2 more right back in there for the granny cluster. So 3 double crochets always back into the same stitch for a granny cluster. And then now we're ready to do our next peak. So we are going to skip 2, and we're going to do our first double crochet, 2nd double crochet, getting to the end of my yarn here, okay, 3rd double crochet, okay, and now chain 1, 2, 3, and then 3 more double crochets right back into that same spot as the last granny cluster. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and this is our next peak. Okay, and now we're going to finish up on the other side. Okay, so to continue on, we're going to skip 2 again, and then we are going to put in another granny cluster. So skip 2, and in that 3rd one, we're going to yarn over, put in, see, get to the front here, get through both loops, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and another granny cluster. There we go. Okay, so as I am working here, I am to the end of my yarn that I have right now. So what I need to do is I need to add in more yarn of the same color. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to show you this on our video here, our tutorial. So how I end up doing it is I do, I think it's called an invisible join, okay, an invisible join. So to do that, I am going to kind of take my 2 strands here, all right, and I like to go this way and that way, and I'm going to tie a knot of one on the other. You may have seen this in other places. If you're like me, you kind of watch a lot of different crocheters, and you're simply going to tie a knot with one of them on one, and I tie a knot, and nice and super duper tight. So I'm pulling this really tight. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other strand on the other loop around it. So I'm going to go like this, and then do another knot just like this, okay? And what you can do now is you can pull these 2 together. They're going to go together, and then you're going to pull this apart real tight, okay? Now, if you would pull on these, they're going to pull apart again, but we don't want to do that, okay? And now it makes a nice little knot here, and I'm going to cut off my two ends real close to the actual knot, and then that way I don't have to worry about weaving the ends in, all right? And then I might trim it a little bit more if I need to. So now I can just continue on and weave that or crochet that right in. So the next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to finish up our row here. So I'm going to do 3 more double crochets. I'm going to skip 2. I'm going to have 3 double crochets in that third one. I'm still not to the end, don't worry. So I'm going to simply go straight in, and I'm going to yarn over, pull up my loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and do a granny cluster on the very end right here. Okay. All right. And then the very last, I have one very last loop on my foundation. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to double crochet in there. Now, you'll notice that here's my knot coming. That's okay. Just act like it's not there, and you're going to go into that last stitch here. I'm going to yarn over, pull up my loop, and do a double crochet into that last stitch just to finish it off. And you'll notice it blends in pretty nicely. Okay. So, so this has now created my chevron, my up, down, my ripple effect on my foundational rows. It's no longer straight. And now we're going to continue on from here using this chevron on our next rows. Okay, let's talk about what we've done already. So first, we chained our first foundation, and that was in multiples of 18 plus 1. Then we came back and we went along that chain and we did slip stitches to create our thicker, wider edge. Then what we did was we created our pattern, if you would, for our ripple stitch. Now we are on row number 3. Row number 3 is going to be our repeat from here on out, okay? So it's really important to take your time when you're doing your chains, your slip stitches, and this first, if you would, foundation row, which ends up being row number 2 in our pattern, because now from here on out, this becomes super easy. So I'm going to put my hook back in my loop, and I'm going to start off each row by chaining 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? I'm going to turn my work. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the first space between my granny clusters. So I'm not going into the end here, but I'm going, here's my first granny cluster, my second granny cluster, and there's a space between there. I am going to do a granny cluster or 3 double crochets right into that space, into the space, not into the loop above. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go right into that space, yarn over, pull up a loop. I've got 3 on, and I'm going to yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. That's my first double crochet in this granny cluster. Then I'm going to do the very same thing right back into the space, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, and I'm going to pull through 2 more right there. There we go. That's 2. Then I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to do my third one to create that granny cluster into the granny cluster space. All right. So that's the first granny cluster here. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to find my next granny cluster. My next granny cluster is going to be the space between this granny cluster and this one. So I've yarned over. I'm going to go straight in. I'm going to create a double crochet. First one, second one, and third one. And that's my granny cluster into the granny space below. Now, notice that I'm coming up on my peak. All right, I got to continue to create a peak here. So I'm going to do the very same thing that I did before, but I'm going to go into what we call the chain 3 space. It's that space right there. So I'm going to start by doing 3 double crochets, a granny cluster, first double crochet, second double crochet, third double crochet. And then just like I did on the previous row, I'm going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. This creates the space for the next row. And then I'm going to do another granny cluster right back into that space that I just was working in. So 3 more right back in. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, now let's lay our work down and see what we've got. So you'll notice that we worked up to the side here, and in that chains 3 space, we did a granny cluster, a chain 3 right here, and then another granny cluster right there. So if I lay this down, I think you can see that space. So there's our space between. And now what we're going to do is we're going to work down this side, and here's the next granny cluster, so the space right between, I'm going to do a granny cluster or 3 double crochets. So let me get my hook back in, and I am going to yarn over. Okay, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Okay, yarn over. I'm going to go right into the space between those 2 granny clusters on the previous row, and I'm going to create another granny cluster or 3 double crochets, right back in there. Yarn over, go right in, yarn over, pull up that loop, yarn over, pull through 2, pull through 2. Yarn over, go in, and here is our third double crochet for that granny cluster. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of lay this out so that you can see. Now I'm going to do another granny cluster right into that space right there. So pick back up, yarn over, go into the space, pull up a loop, yarn over into the space, pull up the loop through 2, through 2. One more, yarn over into the space, get some more yarn here, sorry, and finish up my third double crochet for the granny cluster. Okay, now we are at our valley. So you're going to notice that we have this one here. We are not going to crochet into this space. Not going to crochet in this space. We're going to go across, and we're going to actually crochet our next one into here. So we're going to skip the granny space, and then we're going to granny cluster into the space over here, and that's going to pull these together. Okay, so I'm going to get my yarn going here. I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull this over, and so I'm skipping this one, and I'm going right into the next space. I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and pull through the last 2, and that pulled that together for me. Okay, and now I'm going to add 2 more double crochets right into that spot for the granny cluster. There we go. And then I'm going to granny cluster in my next spot. My space, my granny space. So 3 double crochets, pull out some more yarn, 3 double crochets. There we go. And now I'm coming up on my peak. So in my peak here, I'm going to do 3 double crochets for my first cluster, chain 3, and then another 3 double crochets for my second cluster. So I'm going to pick back up here, okay, right into my peak, yarn over, 3 double crochets for the first granny cluster. Let me see if I think I got to zoom out a little bit now. And 3. First granny cluster. 1, 2, 3 into that space. Now I'm going to chain 3, 3, and that's going to be my space for the next row. And then I'm going to yarn over, And I'm going to do 3 more double crochets for the second granny cluster into that chain 3 space. 3. Okay, so that made my peak for this row. That made my peak for that row. And now we're going to continue. Okay, so this is going to be what we continue to repeat. So the very next granny cluster that we're going to make is going to be in the granny space here, granny space here. So that's what we're going to do next. So I'm going to pick my work back up and I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to come in just a bit. There we go, in between. Yarn over, go right into the granny space between our next 2 clusters, and we're going to do 3 double crochets. Okay, 2 and 3. Okay, so I created a granny cluster in there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do another granny cluster into our next space here. So yarn over, go right into the space. And what's great about this is we don't have to count stitches or try to get into a stitch. We're going for spaces. We're going for spaces. All right. And now we're upon our next valley. So let's look what we got here. I'm going to skip my valley. I'm going to skip this space right here, and I'm going to go into this space right here. So I'm going straight across, if you would. So I'm going to yarn over, and we're going to go into this space right here. Go straight in, yarn over, pull up that loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and scooch these together and pull through those 2. And then we're going to finish out 2 more double crochets to create that granny cluster in that space. There we go. So here's our valley up here. So again, we skipped this one and we went right into that one. All right. So now let's do a granny in our next space. We're almost to the end here. We might as well finish this up together. So yarn over, go straight in, and we're going to do 3 double crochets for a granny cluster into the granny space. Let's see. There we go. And then now we're up on our peak. 3 granny clusters, chain 3, and then 3 granny clusters right back in. So let's do our 3 granny clusters. 1, I'm sorry, not 3 granny clusters, 3 double crochets to create the first granny cluster. This is 2 and 3. Okay. And then we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. All right. And then 3 more double crochets right back in to that chain 3 space. 1, 2, and 3. Oopsie. 3. There we go. Okay. And then we find our next granny space right there. And we're going to do 3 double crochets right in. And we've got our 3 in there. One more space we have here, so we're going to add another granny cluster to this row. And this will be our last granny cluster for the row. So that's 1, 2, 3. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we are going to add a double crochet to the very end of our row. Now, as we look here, you're going to notice that there is, if you would, a little space here between the granny cluster and what was that first row. So we're going to go right into that space. So I'm going to yarn over, and I'm just going to do 1 single double crochet into that space on the end of our row. And that ends the second granny cluster row, or what would be officially row number 3 for our blanket. Now we're ready to turn and create our next row. So to do that, and this is going to be going forward on each one of our rows, we're simply going to chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is going to count as a double crochet and a turning chain. So then I'm going to turn my work, and now I'm going to work again only into the granny spaces. So here's my first granny from my row. Here's the second one, so the space right between. And I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to create a granny cluster or 3 double crochets right into that space. And then we're going to continue with the very same pattern. So there's my first granny cluster for my next row, which would be row number 4. And then as we look here going forward, I'm going to granny cluster into my next space right here. And then at my peak, I'm going to do a granny cluster, chain 3, granny cluster. Then I'm going to do a granny cluster in my space, granny cluster in the space. And then I'm going to skip over, I'm going to skip this one, I'm going to go straight over and granny cluster over here to join these together. And continue up and down as wide as your blanket. The next thing I wanted to show you was how to change color when you get as many rows as you need. So I'm going to add in this blue color here, and we are going to finish up our row with the last double crochet. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go into my chain space on the row before, and I'm simply going to put in 1 double crochet. But before I finish my double crochet, before I do the last yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops, I'm going to actually pull through, instead of the terracotta, I'm going to pull through my blue raspberry. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to simply put it on my hook. I'm going to pull it through the 2 loops right here. Okay, and now this is going to be my new one. And I'm simply going to kind of pull this back. I'm going to cut off my terracotta, a length that I can, comfortably weave in later on. But I do a little knot at the end here because I don't want this to come out because it's on an end. So I'm going to knot this here, and I'm going to do it one more time to create an actual knot. I know some people don't like doing this, but this is bulkier yarn, and I'm going to tell you, you can't feel it in the ends. And then I'm going to leave these 2 out here because I will weave those in at the very end. Now I've got blue on my hook, and using my working yarn, then I'm going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is then going to be the new color for my next row. So I would yarn over and I would double crochet into the first granny space, and then continue on in the very same fashion that we've been doing the other rows. So then there's my granny cluster, and I'm going to continue on. The very last thing that I wanted to show you was how to weave in your ends. So as you know, when you've got a couple rows here, if you do it as you go along or if you do it at the very end, it's totally up to you. But once you get to the point where you're ready to weave in your ends, remember that I knotted this, okay? So it is actually really secure, but I wouldn't suggest cutting this off right here because then you're going to have kind of funny little tails or little frays. So it is good to weave it in for a portion and then cut your yarn off. Now, make sure that you have these ends long enough that you can weave in. So I'm just going to simply add one of these ends to my yarn needle, okay? And then I am going to, now because there are 2 colors here, I'm going to obviously weave it into the color that matches. And that's just, going along any one of these stitches kind of in and out so that it's gonna hide it as it's going through. Whoopsie. Let me get back on there. Sometimes that happens. And then once you've gone in a couple different directions, kind of willy-nilly around here, then when you've got it weaved in, you can just simply cut it at the base there, okay? And then you're going to want to do the same thing for the other color. So again, Just getting your yarn into your needle. Oopsie, this one's frayed at the end here. There we go. Okay. And then in this case, I'm going to go up that chain that we created, and you can just go up it, you know, just kind of scooch it in there. And then make your way in a couple different directions so that this isn't going to come out. Even over. There we go. And then once you feel like it's in, I would probably go a couple more directions, and then you have everything finished off. Now, before we adjourn, I wanted to just do a quick review of the pattern that I used for my colors. So I started out on my blanket with the chain stitch, the slip stitch row, and then I did 3 rows of the ivory color. Then I changed over to the terracotta and I did 6 rows of terracotta. Then I went to 1 row of the ivory or the off-white again, and then I did another 6 rows of the blue raspberry. Then I alternated and I went white or the off-white, ivory, and then 6 rows again of the terracotta, and off-white, ivory, and then 6 rows of the blue raspberry, and then one more time the ivory, terracotta, and then I did 3 rows of the ivory and finished it off. Now this created a blanket that was 36 by 36, so a lap gan size. And hopefully you were able to follow along and get all the information you need to make this. You'll notice down in the description below, I'm going to have all of the information for the pattern. If you have any questions, have any comments, please feel free to leave those there and I will be sure to answer those. And if you did enjoy this tutorial and found it helpful, please like and share. And if you aren't a subscriber yet, please consider subscribing to my channel. Okay, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next project.